the summer of 2013, five college friends, Liam, Drew, Kelsey, Brian, and Tara, decided to go on a camping trip deep into the Huron-Manistee National Forest in northern Michigan. It was meant to be a digital detox, a weekend escape from finals, social media, and the chaos of campus life. They picked a spot far from marked trails, miles into dense woods, where the nearest signs of civilization were hours away. There was no cell service, no traffic, no glow of distant lights, just silence, trees, and sky. The first night was exactly what they'd hoped for. They set up camp beside a small clearing where the stars peeked brightly between the tall pines. A fire crackled in the center, casting flickering shadows that danced along the trees. They roasted marshmallows, shared ghost stories, laughed, and played music off a half-charged Bluetooth speaker. It was a perfect night. There was something nostalgic about the warmth of the fire and the way it pushed back the darkness just enough to feel safe. But on the second night, things changed. It was just after 10 p.m. The sun had long disappeared, and the forest was black beyond the reach of their firelight. Liam volunteered to gather more firewood before they ran out, heading just a few feet beyond the ring of trees with a flashlight in hand. That's when he saw it, something standing among the trees. At first, he thought it was a person, a tall figure, still as a statue, just beyond where the light faded. But when he blinked and raised the flashlight, it was gone. He returned to the fire, visibly unsettled. The others noticed, asked if he was okay, and he brushed it off. I thought I saw something, he said. Probably just a tree stump. But his voice lacked confidence, and his eyes kept darting toward the woods. They tried to resume their night, but an unease had settled over the group. The air felt heavier, the forest quieter. Eventually, they decided to call it a night and retreat to their tents. That's when the real terror began. It started with faint crunching in the distance, like footsteps on dry leaves. At first, they all thought it was a deer or maybe a raccoon, but then the sounds circled the tents, slowly, deliberately. Each step was heavy, careful, and methodical. It wasn't an animal, it was walking with purpose. Kelsey whispered across the tent wall. Are you hearing that? Everyone was. Then it stopped. For a few minutes, there was nothing, just the sound of their breathing and the soft wind rustling the tops of the trees. And then Liam heard it. A voice whispered right outside his tent, a slow, rasping breath, followed by words that chilled him to the bone. Cold night, huh? The voice was inches from him. He could hear it through the thin nylon, as if someone were crouched right there. He didn't move, couldn't. His body was locked in place. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. After several frozen minutes, he finally unzipped the flap with shaking hands and peered out. Across the dim glow of their dying fire stood the figure again. It was impossibly tall, at least 7 feet. Its body looked twisted, bent at the shoulders, almost like it had to compress itself to fit in human spaces. Its head was cocked slightly, as though observing them. No eyes could be seen, no face, just a faint suggestion of a mouth, grinning, too wide, too wrong. This time, Brian saw it too, and cursed under his breath. They scrambled out of their tents and gathered by the fire, armed with sticks and flashlights, hearts racing. But when they aimed the light toward the figure, it was gone, just like before. Only the echo of crunching footsteps remained, retreating into the forest. No one slept that night. They stayed up together, backs to each other, staring into the woods until dawn finally bled into the trees. They left in silence the next morning, packing quickly, refusing to speak of what they saw. But a week later, the image still haunted Liam. He convinced the others to return with a local park ranger, just to make sure no one had been stalking them, or worse. When they arrived at the old camp, everything was as they left it, the ashes of their last fire still in the pit, the logs cold and gray. But one thing was new. In the middle of the fire pit was a small wooden object, charred but intact, a carving, a crude figure, no eyes, no nose, just a flat face with a carved grin so wide it looked torn into the wood. Mouth stretched unnaturally, down almost to where the neck should be. The ranger's expression changed immediately. He didn't smile, didn't laugh. He knelt down beside the carving, then stood slowly. You saw him, didn't you? He asked. They were silent. Locals call him the Watcher, not a ghost, not a man, just something old, something that doesn't like company. He paused and added, almost under his breath, he's not dangerous if you leave, but if you stay too long, he remembers. It was just after 2:30 in the morning on a thick, humid June night in 2005. Mark was 19 years old and dead tired after pulling a long shift at the all-night diner on the outskirts of Macon, Georgia. His uniform smelled like fryer grease, and the only thing on his mind was getting home, taking a cold shower, and crashing into bed. The roads were empty, the air heavy with mist, and the only sound in his car was the soft hum of an old FM radio, flickering between static and weak country stations. To save time, Mark took the back roads, a two-lane stretch of cracked asphalt that twisted through farmland, pine thickets, and forgotten towns. Somewhere along that road was an old train overpass, a rusted steel bridge that hadn't been used in decades. Everyone around town knew the story behind it. They said a girl, heartbroken and humiliated after being abandoned by her prom date in the 1970s, had thrown herself from that bridge in her dress and heels, and that sometimes, late at night, if the fog was thick enough and your lights dim enough, she'd appear again. Mark didn't believe in that kind of stuff. Ghost stories were for kids around bonfires. He'd driven under that overpass a dozen times and never seen anything. That night, though, something felt different. As he neared the bridge, the fog thickened. It wasn't normal fog. It crawled in from the woods like smoke, curling over the road, dulling the shine of his headlights. The trees on either side of the road became black silhouettes. His windshield began to fog up from the humidity, so he cracked the window slightly. That's when the smell hit him, wet soil and rotting wood, like the smell of a flooded basement. Then, out of the fog, he saw her, a figure dead center in the road. He slammed on the brakes, tires screeched. The car skidded and jolted to a stop just a few feet away. The headlights lit her up, a girl standing barefoot on the asphalt, her pale skin nearly glowing. Her dress hung in tatters, soaked and clinging to her frame, like she had just climbed out of a river. Her long dark hair hung over her face, but Mark could tell she wasn't hurt. She wasn't crying. She was just still, too still. His heart was thudding against his ribs. He didn't know whether to drive off or check if she needed help. Against his better judgment, he leaned over and rolled the passenger side window down just a few inches. Are you okay? He called out, voice dry in his throat. She didn't answer, didn't blink, just stared. And then she moved. Not her legs, not her arms, just her mouth. It opened slowly, and then wider and wider and wider still. Her jaw stretched beyond anything natural, like it was unhinging. Her head tilted back sharply, exposing the full gaping mouth. Then her eyes rolled back, leaving only the whites. Her limbs began to twitch, jerky, unnatural, like someone pulling puppet strings. Mark screamed. His foot slammed the gas pedal, and the car rocketed forward, swerving slightly as he passed where she had stood. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, she was gone. Not on the road, not in the fog, just vanished. The drive home after that felt like a dream. Every shadow looked like a person. Every passing tree seemed to watch him. When he finally pulled into the driveway and stepped out, he noticed something almost immediately. The hood of his car was wet, not from fog, not from dew. Muddy footprints, bare, small. They started at the front of the hood and walked up toward the windshield. He stood there frozen, staring. His heart pounded in his throat. The footprints weren't faded. They were fresh, glistening under the porch light. And worse, they ended on the driver's side, right above the window. Mark turned slowly and looked at the glass beside his seat. There it was, a handprint, not a smudge, not dirt. A full, clear handprint pressed into the fogged window. The fingers were long, too long, and they were pressed inward, pointing directly at the seat he had been sitting in. He backed away, too afraid to look any more. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He kept every light in the house on, locked every window, and parked his car facing the street like distance could protect him from whatever followed him home. He told himself it was just stress, just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the next morning, when he went outside again, the handprint was still there, and this time there were two of them, one on the glass and one on the inside. The summer of 2020 was quiet for most people, but for Jacob, it was dead silent. The pandemic had locked everything down, and he'd retreated to his family's old farmhouse in central Kansas, a place surrounded by endless fields and skies so open it felt like the clouds could swallow you whole. His parents had left years ago for Florida, and his siblings had moved to the city. The farm sat on over 300 acres of corn and soy, and the closest neighbor was more than 2 miles away. Jacob liked the isolation at first. No noise, no people, no pressure, just the wind and the rustling corn. Most of his days were filled with chores, late night walks, and scrolling endlessly on his phone, watching the world fall apart from a safe distance. He didn't mind the solitude until he did. It started one night in late July, one of those heavy, motionless nights where the air feels thick, like it's holding its breath. Around 11:15 p.m., Jacob stepped outside for fresh air and a smoke. The back porch overlooked the main cornfield, which stretched almost a full mile to the east. That night, the moon was out, but barely, a thin crescent behind fast-moving clouds. There wasn't a hint of wind, not a single cricket. Even the frogs were quiet. That's when he heard it. Not wind, not bugs. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Wet. Mechanical. Like something trying to remember how lungs worked. He stood frozen for a few seconds, listening. At first, he thought maybe it was a cow, something lost and wheezing in the distance. But the sound wasn't coming from across the field. It was coming from within it, from between the rows, maybe 30, 40 feet from the edge. He flicked on his flashlight and scanned the first row. Nothing. But then, through the stalks, something moved. Tall. Too tall. sliding just behind the corn without bending it, as if it glided just above the ground. It paused every few steps, and every time it did, it breathed again. Inhale, wet and deep. Exhale, like a deflating lung wrapped in plastic. Jacob's blood turned cold. He turned and ran inside, bolting the door behind him. He checked every window, every lock, his heart thudding in his ears. The breathing had stopped, or maybe it hadn't. He couldn't tell through the panic. He stayed up that night, phone in hand, refreshing Twitter and trying to drown out the memory of what he'd seen. But at 3:13 a.m. exactly, he heard it again. This time, it wasn't out in the field. It was right outside his bedroom window. He didn't move at first. He just lay there paralyzed, the blankets pulled to his chin. Then slowly he sat up and reached for the flashlight he kept by the bed. He turned it on and aimed it at the blinds. The slats were slightly open, just enough to see out into the dark. That's when he saw it. A figure, hunched but massive, standing less than a foot from the window. It had skin like parchment paper, thin and gray, and stretched tight over bones that looked like they didn't belong together. It had no eyes, no ears, just a long, unnatural mouth that pulsed in and out with every breath. Jacob didn't scream. He couldn't. The thing leaned forward slowly until its twisted mouth was nearly touching the glass, and then it exhaled. The window fogged instantly from the warmth of its breath, and as quickly as it came, it was gone. Jacob sat in bed, shaking, the flashlight trembling in his grip. It was almost morning before he dared to move again. When the sun finally rose, he went outside, unsure if he had dreamed it or lost his mind completely. But in the cornfield, right in the center, was a perfect circle of blackened stalks. The corn was wilted and dead, like it had been burned, though there were no signs of fire. In the center of that circle, laid out with almost ritualistic care, was a small pile of human teeth, clean, white, all different sizes. He checked his mouth, checked his parents' old medical supplies. Nothing was missing. He called the sheriff, but they couldn't identify the teeth. They didn't match any active case, no one had reported a break-in, and nothing else on the property was disturbed. Jacob tried to forget, tried to sleep, tried to move on. But something was still there, because every night after that, at exactly 3:13 a.m., the breathing returned, sometimes far, sometimes near, sometimes just outside his door. And the worst part, the teeth kept appearing. A week later, another pile, this time under his truck. Then again, 2 weeks after that, in the old barn, laid neatly on the workbench. And the breathing? It never truly stopped. Even now, Jacob swears that if you stand in the center of that dead corn circle and hold your breath long enough, you'll hear it breathing for you.